Elon Musk saves Joe Biden from hostage situation. Elon Musk sat quietly in his sleek, minimalist office, staring at the multiple screens in front of him. The city skyline glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, but Elon's mind wasn't on the breathtaking view. He leaned back in his chair, lost in thought, until a sudden ping snapped him back to reality. His eyes flicked to the encrypted notification on the monitor, unmistakable, urgent. For a moment, he didn't move. The code was one only a few people in the world had access to, and the message attached to it sent a chill through his usually calm demeanor. Rogue operation in progress. High-level hostages. White House protocol breached. He tapped a few keys, digging deeper into the transmission. His brow furrowed. Joe Biden's name stood out among the list of hostages, along with several key officials. This wasn't a standard security breach, it was something far more calculated. Elon had always kept his connections to the government discreet. After all, innovation and diplomacy didn't always mix well. But this was different. The stakes were too high to ignore. He clicked another button, activating a secure channel. His AI assistant, which he had designed himself, spoke in its calm monotone voice. "Elon, I've confirmed the location. It's the Federal Security Complex downtown. Unauthorized personnel are controlling the main building. Official response teams have been delayed due to traffic blockades in the area." Elon frowned. The delay wasn't an accident, it was part of the plan. Whoever orchestrated this wanted to ensure no immediate backup arrived. His mind raced, analyzing the situation as if it were another complex engineering problem. He could let the authorities handle it, of course. But deep down, he knew they wouldn't act fast enough. Too much bureaucracy. Too many protocols. And then there was Biden. Elon had met the president several times over the years. Their relationship was one of mutual respect, built on private collaborations on energy and security projects that few knew existed. This wasn't just a national crisis, it was personal. "Elon," the AI continued, "I strongly advise against direct involvement." He smirked. "Advise all you want. I'm not sitting this one out." He pushed back from his desk and stood, stretching his arms slightly before walking across the room to a concealed panel in the wall. With a flick of his wrist, the wall slid open, revealing what looked like a sleek armory. Rows of futuristic gadgets and gear lined the shelves, prototypes never revealed to the public. Most were for personal research, but today, they'd serve a different purpose. Elon's fingers hovered over a set of reinforced body armor. He slipped it on, feeling the weight settle around his shoulders. Next, he grabbed a small, unassuming device no larger than a smartphone, one of his newest inventions. It could temporarily disable any electronic device within a 50-meter radius. Perfect for what he had in mind. Minutes later, he was in his custom electric vehicle, zipping through the city streets at speeds no one would consider legal. The windows darkened automatically, shielding him from prying eyes as he navigated toward the Federal Security Complex. His mind remained laser-focused on the mission ahead. As he neared the perimeter, the scale of the situation became apparent. Police barricades blocked off several streets, and armed officers stood at attention, unsure of how to proceed. The tension in the air was palpable. Elon parked a few blocks away, slipping out unnoticed. He pulled up a holographic map on his wrist device, scanning for the least guarded entry point. The complex was a fortress, but he knew it better than most. He'd consulted on its construction years ago. His eyes locked on a service tunnel beneath the main building. It wasn't marked on most schematics, but Elon had made sure to keep a copy for himself. He made his way there, moving with surprising agility for someone known more for tech talks than covert operations. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a cluster of bushes, partially obscured by years of neglect. He tapped a few commands on his wrist device, and the heavy grate slid open silently. The darkness inside seemed to swallow him whole, but Elon pressed forward without hesitation. As he moved deeper into the tunnel, his footsteps echoed softly against the concrete walls. His mind stayed sharp, calculating every possible scenario. He knew this wasn't a solo mission. Someone on the inside would recognize him sooner or later. The trick was staying ahead of the game until then. After what felt like an eternity, he reached a steel door at the end of the tunnel. He placed his hand on the biometric scanner, which lit up with a soft green glow. It wasn't technically authorized for him anymore, but Elon's tech always had a way of bending the rules. The door hissed open, revealing a narrow corridor bathed in dim red emergency lighting. The main hostage situation was 2 floors above him, according to his intel. He moved swiftly, keeping to the shadows as he climbed a service staircase. His heartbeat remained steady, his focus unshakable. At the top of the stairs, he paused, peeking through a small window in the door. The main conference room lay beyond, its glass walls giving him a clear view of the chaos inside. Biden sat at the center of the room, hands raised in calm defiance. His face betrayed no fear, but the tension in his posture was unmistakable. Around him, a group of armed men moved like a well-rehearsed unit, communicating silently with hand signals. Elon narrowed his eyes. These weren't amateurs. His wrist device buzzed softly, and a voice crackled through. "Elon, this is Director Harris. I don't know how you got into the building, but you need to stand down. We've got negotiators en route." "Too slow," Elon replied, keeping his voice low. "They've already cut off the main entry points and locked down communications. By the time your negotiators get through, it'll be too late." Director Harris sighed. "Elon, I can't officially condone this." "Good," Elon said with a slight grin. "Then we won't waste time on paperwork." He tapped his wrist device again, silencing the channel. Time to get to work. Scanning the room, he formulated a plan in seconds. He needed to take out their communication system first. If they couldn't coordinate, they'd be vulnerable. His eyes locked on a small device clipped to the leader's belt, a mobile signal jammer. He pulled out the EMP device from his belt, his thumb hovering over the activation button. It would knock out every piece of electronic equipment in the room, including the hostage-taker's weapons, for precisely 10 seconds. 10 seconds wasn't much, but it was enough. Elon took a deep breath, steadying himself. And then he pressed the button. The effect was instantaneous. The lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. Panicked shouts filled the air as the hostage-takers scrambled to regain control. Elon burst through the door, moving with practiced precision. His footsteps were nearly silent, his body a blur in the darkness. One by one, he disabled the nearest attackers, his movements swift and efficient. Biden watched eyes wide as the figure in black moved through the chaos like a shadow. The president's lips curled into a slight smile. "Elon," he whispered. The lights flickered back on just as the last attacker hit the ground, groaning in pain. Elon stood in the center of the room, his eyes scanning the remaining threats. A tense silence settled over the room. Elon Musk, the leader, spat, rising to his feet. He clutched a small remote in his hand, his thumb hovering over the trigger. "I should have known you'd show up." Elon tilted his head slightly. "Then you should have planned better." The leader's face twisted into a snarl. "One more step and I blow the entire building." Elon didn't flinch. His mind raced, calculating his next move. He needed to buy time, just a few more seconds. Elon's eyes locked onto the remote in the leader's hand. Time seemed to slow, every second stretching into an eternity. His mind calculated a dozen possibilities in a fraction of a heartbeat. His voice was calm, almost conversational, cutting through the tension in the room. "You don't want to do that," Elon said, taking a slow step forward. His body language was relaxed, but his eyes were sharp, assessing every movement the leader made. Blowing the building? Not exactly a sustainable solution. Think about the carbon footprint. The leader frowned, momentarily thrown off by the unexpected remark. His grip on the remote tightened, but doubt flickered in his eyes. Elon seized on the moment. "You know who I am," Elon continued, "which means you know what I'm capable of. You push that button, and you'll lose every chance you have of walking out of here alive. But I might just help you." A murmur rippled through the other hostage-takers, their confidence shaken. The leader glanced around, realizing the balance of power was shifting. The hostages were no longer trembling in fear. Their eyes were fixed on Elon, hope flickering where panic had once been. "I don't need your help," the leader spat. His thumb hovered over the trigger, but his hand was trembling now. "I have the upper hand." Elon smirked, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Do you? He raised his wrist device slightly, the holographic interface flickering to life. A series of numbers scrolled rapidly across the display, too fast for anyone to follow. The leader's remote beeped once, then twice, before the light on it blinked out. The leader's eyes widened in disbelief. He pressed the button frantically, but nothing happened. The room seemed to hold its breath. Remote override, Elon explained with a shrug. Nice little feature I built last year. Your detonator is offline. The leader's face twisted in rage. With a roar, he lunged at Elon, but Elon was ready. He sidestepped the attack with practiced ease, twisting the leader's arm and forcing him to the ground in a single fluid motion. The remote clattered to the floor, useless. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be, Elon said, his tone still maddeningly calm. He glanced at the nearest hostage taker. Drop your weapons. No. For a moment, no one moved. Then, one by one, the men began lowering their weapons, their bravado draining away in the face of inevitable defeat. Elon nodded approvingly. Smart choice. Biden rose from his chair, brushing himself off as if nothing unusual had happened. He looked at Elon, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. Always making an entrance, huh? Biden said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. Elon chuckled. You know me. Never one for subtlety. The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. A squad of heavily armed federal agents burst into the room, their weapons raised, eyes scanning for threats. Director Harris was at the front, his expression a mixture of relief and exasperation. Stand down, Harris barked at the agents. Situation's under control. He turned to Elon, shaking his head. You just can't help yourself, can you? Would you have preferred I stayed home? Elon quipped, raising an eyebrow. Harris sighed, but there was a hint of a smile in his eyes. I suppose I owe you one. Again, the agents moved swiftly, securing the scene and leading the subdued attackers out of the room. The tension that had hung so thick in the air began to dissipate, replaced by a palpable sense of relief. Biden clapped a hand on Elon's shoulder. I'm not sure whether to thank you or lecture you. Elon grinned. Why not both? The president shook his head, laughing softly. You've got guts, I'll give you that. As the last of the attackers was escorted out, Director Harris approached again, his expression more serious now. Elon, we need to talk. This wasn't just a random attack. They knew exactly what they were looking for. Elon's smile faded. I figured as much. What were they after? Harris glanced around, ensuring no one else was listening. It's connected to the energy project you worked on 2 years ago, the fusion reactor prototype. We've kept it classified, but somehow they knew. This wasn't just a hostage situation. It was an extraction mission. Elon nodded slowly, his mind already racing ahead. He remembered the project well. The technology had the potential to revolutionize energy production, but in the wrong hands, it could also be weaponized. He had suspected it might become a target someday, but he hadn't expected it to happen so soon. Do you still have control of the core systems? Elon asked. For now, Harris said. But we need to tighten security immediately. If they got this close once, they'll try again. Elon's eyes narrowed. Then we'd better make sure they never get another chance. He turned to Biden, his expression serious. Mr. President, I think we need to talk strategy. This isn't over. Biden nodded. Agreed. But first, I think we all need a strong cup of coffee. Elon laughed, the tension finally breaking for a moment. Now that I won't argue with. The group began making their way toward the exit, the adrenaline slowly fading as the reality of what had just happened sank in. Outside, the streets were swarming with media crews and curious onlookers. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Elon ignored them, his mind already focused on the next steps. He knew this was just the beginning. The attackers may have failed this time, but the threat was far from over. And if they thought they could outsmart him, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The road ahead would be dangerous, but Elon had never been one to back down from a challenge. He thrived on solving problems no one else could. This was no different. He glanced at Biden, who gave him a knowing look. Without a word, they both understood. The game was on. Elon Musk sat in the dimly lit conference room, the scent of burnt wiring still lingering from the chaos earlier. The adrenaline in his veins had settled, but his mind was still sharp, dissecting everything that had happened. Across from him, President Biden sipped his coffee, his expression thoughtful. Director Harris stood near the window, his phone pressed against his ear. He was coordinating cleanup efforts, barking orders to ensure the captured hostage-takers were properly processed and interrogated. The room was still on high alert, but for now, the immediate crisis had passed. Biden finally set his cup down and exhaled. "Elon," he said, his voice steady but carrying a weight of concern, "what just happened tonight? It wasn't just an attack, was it?" Elon tapped his fingers against the table. "No," he admitted. "These guys weren't your run-of-the-mill extremists. They had precision, strategy. Someone fed them intel, and they knew exactly what they were looking for." Harris hung up and turned to the two men. "They were after the fusion project," he confirmed grimly. "And that means we have a much bigger problem on our hands." Biden frowned. The fusion project was supposed to be under maximum security. Who could have leaked the information? Elon leaned forward, his voice low but deliberate. "That's what we need to figure out before they try again. If they were willing to stage an operation like this, they're desperate. And desperate people don't stop." A heavy silence settled over the room. The implications were clear. If someone had infiltrated their highest levels of security, they weren't just dealing with external threats anymore. This was an inside job. Harris cleared his throat. "I've got a team running a trace on their communications. If we're lucky, we'll get a lead on who they were working for." Elon's expression darkened. "I wouldn't count on luck. These guys weren't sloppy. They knew what they were doing." Biden rubbed his temples. "So, what's our next move?" Elon stood, his mind already forming a plan. "We go on the offensive?" Harris raised an eyebrow. Meaning, Elon said, "we stop waiting for them to come to us. We find out who they are, who's backing them, and we shut them down before they get another shot." Biden considered him for a long moment before nodding. "I assume you already have an idea?" Elon allowed a small smirk. "Of course." He pulled up a holographic display from his wrist device, showing a network of encrypted signals bouncing across the globe. The screen filled with rapidly shifting lines of code, unreadable to the untrained eye. "I started tracking anomalies in classified networks months ago," Elon explained. "At first, I thought it was just routine espionage, cyber intrusions from rival nations, the usual stuff. But then I started noticing patterns. These weren't just random attacks. Someone has been systematically probing our defenses, looking for something specific." Harris crossed his arms. "And you think it was the fusion project?" Elon nodded. "It fits the timeline. The closer we got to finalizing the tech, the more intense the breaches became." Biden leaned forward. "And you didn't think to tell us sooner?" Elon shrugged. "I was still gathering evidence. And frankly, I wasn't sure who I could trust." That statement lingered in the air, unspoken accusations resting heavily between them. If there was a leak, if someone inside the government had sold them out, then trusting the wrong person could have catastrophic consequences. Harris exhaled sharply. "So, you've been playing detective on your own this whole time?" "More like preventive maintenance," Elon said casually. "Besides, we're wasting time arguing. We need to act." Biden looked between the two men. "All right," he said finally. "What do you need?" Elon's smirk widened. "A secure facility, off the grid. And access to every piece of intel you've got?" Harris scoffed. "That's a big ask." "It's a necessary one," Elon countered. "If we don't get ahead of this, we won't just be dealing with another hostage situation. We'll be dealing with something a whole lot worse." Biden didn't hesitate. "Do it?" Harris sighed, rubbing his temples. "Fine. But you'd better be right about this, Musk." Elon grinned. "Aren't I always?" Hours later, Elon stood in an underground bunker, walls lined with monitors displaying classified data streams. The government had provided the space, but the tech was all his. He cracked his knuckles and got to work. Lines of code scrolled across his screens as he ran algorithmic scans, searching for any trace of the attacker's digital footprints. This wasn't just about finding out who they were. It was about predicting their next move. Behind him, Harris paced impatiently. Anything yet? Elon didn't look up. Patience. Harris grumbled something under his breath, but stayed quiet. Minutes passed. Then, suddenly, one of the screens blinked red. There, Elon muttered. His fingers flew across the keyboard, decrypting the data. A location appeared on the map, a small industrial facility on the outskirts of the city. Harris peered over his shoulder. That's a private research lab. Supposedly abandoned. Elon's lips curled into a smirk. Supposedly, Biden, who had been watching silently from the corner, stepped forward. You think they're operating out of there? Elon nodded. It's the most promising lead we've got. Harris frowned. You realize we can't just storm the place without cause? Elon's smirk didn't fade. Who said anything about we? Harris groaned. Oh, for the love of Musk, you are not going in there alone. I'll have backup, Elon assured him. Just unconventional backup. Biden crossed his arms. Mr. President, Elon replied smoothly. Trust me. Biden exhaled heavily. Fine. But if this goes sideways, I'll handle it, Elon promised. The industrial complex was as nondescript as they came, gray walls, rusted gates, a skeleton crew of guards patrolling the perimeter. From the outside, it looked like any other forgotten government relic. Elon, dressed in a sleek, armored bodysuit of his own design, crouched in the shadows. His wrist device flickered to life, running silent scans of the facility. Minimal heat signatures, he murmured. But the security system is too sophisticated for an abandoned site. He tapped a command, activating a drone that hovered silently above the building. The feed streamed directly to his visor, giving him a bird's-eye view. Then he saw it. A hidden underground entrance. Bingo. Elon moved swiftly, bypassing the outer security with calculated efficiency. His custom-made stealth tech rendered him nearly invisible to cameras, allowing him to slip past unnoticed. He reached the hidden entrance and placed a hand on the scanner. His device worked its magic, overriding the lock within seconds. The door slid open. Elon stepped inside. The air was cool, sterile. The underground facility hummed with unseen energy, the sound of distant machinery echoing through the halls. He moved cautiously, eyes scanning for threats. Then he found it. A server room, lined with terminals displaying classified data. Files on energy research, government projects, and Elon's breath hitched. His name was on one of the files. Before he could process it, a voice echoed from behind him. Took you long enough? Elon turned and froze. Standing in the doorway was a figure he hadn't expected. Someone he thought was gone. Someone who knew too much. A ghost from his past. Elon's eyes narrowed. The figure smirked. Surprised, Elon's fingers twitched over his wrist device, preparing for anything. You should be in a cell. The smirk didn't fade. Things change. A chill ran down Elon's spine. He had just walked into something much bigger than he had anticipated, and he wasn't sure he was ready for what came next. Elon didn't move. His eyes flicked over the figure in front of him, analyzing every detail. The smirk, the stance, the calculated way they stood just out of reach. It all told him one thing. They weren't surprised to see him, which meant they had expected him. The figure took a slow step forward, hands raised slightly in mock surrender. Relax, Musk. No need to do anything rash. Elon's voice was calm, but his body was tense, ready to react at a moment's notice. Funny. That's exactly what I was going to say to you. The figure chuckled. Still quick with the comebacks. Good to know fame hasn't dulled that edge of yours. Elon didn't take the bait. You shouldn't be here. Last I checked, people like you don't just walk away from maximum security prison cells. The smirk on the figure's face widened. And yet, here I am. Elon's mind raced. This person wasn't just an old enemy, they were a direct threat. Someone with knowledge of his past projects, his security measures, his technology. And if they had resurfaced now, it wasn't a coincidence. You were behind the attack, Elon said, watching closely for a reaction. The figure shrugged. Not directly. But let's just say, I have a vested interest in your little fusion project? Elon's jaw tightened. He didn't like the sound of that. Before he could reply, a sharp beep echoed in his earpiece. A signal from his drone outside. Movement detected. Reinforcements. Elon took a small step back, his wrist device flickering as he prepared for the worst. I'm guessing you didn't come alone. The figure tilted their head. Neither did you. A tense silence filled the air. Then, all at once, everything exploded into motion. Elon's drone outside sent out a burst of interference, jamming nearby communications and scrambling enemy signals. He activated his suit's defensive protocols, his reflexes heightened as the first wave of attackers rushed into the room. He didn't hesitate. With a flick of his wrist, Elon launched a small energy pulse from his wrist device, knocking back the closest enemy. He spun, dodging an incoming strike, his mind calculating every movement with precision. The figure in the doorway just watched, amusement dancing in their eyes. You always were a hands-on kind of guy, they mused. Elon didn't respond. He was too busy dismantling the next attacker, using their own momentum against them. A swift elbow, a perfectly placed kick, and the man crumpled to the ground. The room buzzed with tension as more enemies poured in. Elon exhaled sharply. This was bad. He needed to get out of there. His wrist device blinked red, warning him of incoming hostiles blocking his escape routes. He had two options: fight his way through or take an alternative exit. He made his decision in an instant. With a quick movement, he grabbed a small sphere from his belt and tossed it to the ground. Smoke erupted instantly, filling the room with a dense fog. Confusion spread among the attackers. Shouts rang out as they stumbled blindly, trying to find their target. Elon didn't wait. He moved swiftly, slipping through the chaos and heading toward the emergency exit he had spotted earlier. The figure in the doorway didn't stop him. They simply smiled, watching him disappear into the shadows. As Elon sprinted down the corridor, he activated his communicator. Harris. I've been made. They were expecting me. Harris's voice crackled through the earpiece, sharp and urgent. Do you have anything? Elon glanced back briefly before rounding the next corner. More questions than answers. And an old ghost I didn't expect to see. There was a pause. You mean? Yes, Elon cut in. It's worse than we thought. A door ahead slammed shut, locking itself automatically. Elon didn't slow down. He raised his wrist, firing a quick pulse of energy at the lock. It sparked, and the door slid open just in time for him to slip through. Harris was still speaking. We're sending a team to extract you. Too late, Elon muttered. I'm already extracting myself. He reached the outer perimeter of the facility, his car waiting in the shadows. The moment he was inside, the doors locked, and the engine roared to life. Tires screeched as he peeled away from the compound, his heart still pounding. He wasn't sure what disturbed him more, the fact that he had walked into a trap, or the fact that the real game was only just beginning.